Good morning. The Committee on Oversight and Government Reform will come to order. Without objection, the presiding members are authorized to declare a recess at any time. I'll recognize myself first for an opening statement, and then the gentleman from Maryland. Denis Rice was a firefighter working in the El Dorado National Forest. Despite the dangers and the risk and the difficulty of fighting fire, she loved her job. One of the dangers, the risk, if you will, that firefighters do not sign up for is sexual harassment and assault. From 2009 to 2011, Denis was repeatedly harassed and assaulted by a supervisor. In 2011, she took the difficult, courageous step of reporting this assault and harassment. And you would think that that would be the day the harassment and assault stopped. And you would think that would be the day that her assaulters and harassers' lives would change. But you would be wrong. It was the day her life changed. She told this committee her supervisory responsibilities were removed. She was the one moved to a new location. She was the one placed in an office where the perpetrator's friends and wife worked. Numerous investigations were conducted, which means Denis was interviewed multiple times, which means she had to tell different investigators over and over and over again what happened to her. There are many reasons you do not subject victims to multiple interviews. One of the reasons is the human toll it takes to have to relive the incidents time and time again. Compounding an already traumatic set of circumstances, one of the investigators provided the details of her assault and harassment to her peers. This is unconscionable. It further victimizes the victims, and it is a gross betrayal of the confidence that is absolutely essential to successfully investigating and punishing these cases. On an equally important human level, Denis said, "I lost my reputation and my dignity when they made my situation public." One day, the district ranger called a meeting to discuss the investigation. Denis begged them not to make her attend, but to no avail. She was instructed to be there. When the district ranger began describing what happened to Denis, her peers, people she had known and worked with for years, turned and looked at her. She felt like she was on display. She felt responsible, degraded, humiliated. Once the investigations were complete, the results were provided to the district rangers, who determined the perpetrator needed to be removed. But conveniently, the perpetrator supervisor took him out for coffee before he was fired and advised the perpetrator of the situation. The following day, Denis's perpetrator retired. So if I have this right, Denis was harassed, assaulted, moved, forced to relive the incidents time and time again, her confidentiality betrayed and put on public display. That's what the victim experienced. The perpetrator, what happened to him, you might ask? He was never actually fired or removed from his post. He was afforded the luxury of retiring. What happened to Denis, as wrong and troubling as it is not an isolated incident, which is why we are back here again today, because no one should have to choose between her career and her safety, and no one should have to choose between a job she loves and harassment, and no one should have to choose between speaking up and staying in a position that she deserves, and no one should have to choose between silence and justice. Among the most fundamental guarantees you should be afforded in public service is an environment free from assault, harassment, betrayal, and re-victimization. This committee has heard firsthand numerous stories of sexual harassment, sexual assault, and retaliation within the Forestry Service. Since Denis testified before our committee in 2016, our committee is told the Forest Service launched a number of initiatives to improve its work environment and deter misconduct. They now hold listening sessions, require misconduct investigations for all sexual harassment allegations, and have implemented a harassment reporting center. Despite these efforts, the committee has continued to receive reports of harassment, misconduct, and retaliation. Both current and former Forest Service employees have shared allegations of unpunished misconduct, retaliation, and even assault. With us today, and I shared with my friend from Maryland before we began, is the relatively new chief. She was appointed last month. to lead the Forest Service. Chief, I am well aware and fully understand that you were not on watch when most, if not all, of this happened. The assault and discrimination that plagued this agency in large measure occurred before you assumed your current role. But you are here now, and it is your watch, and it is a unique opportunity today and in the nascent stages of your tenure to send a clear, unmistakable message that this conduct will be found, investigated, punished, the victims and their confidentiality and right to fundamental fairness will be safeguarded. I think the time of transition is precisely the right time to send this message as clearly as you can possibly deliver it. With us today is the U.S. Department of Agriculture Inspector General Phyllis Fong. Ms. Fong, we understand that in March, the Inspector General issued an interim audit report recommending the Forest Service use outside investigators for claims of sexual harassment and sexual misconduct, establishment guidelines for hiring qualified investigators, and stipulated in writing investigators outside the agency must possess the required qualifications to conduct these investigations. We also understand the Office of IG is currently preparing a full audit report to determine whether the Forest Service's actions to address complaints about sexual harassment, sexual misconduct were implemented in accordance with the agreement with the Office of General Counsel and the Office of the Assistant Secretary for Civil Rights. We thank you for appearing before the committee today, and we look forward to your testimony. I also want to welcome Ms. Shannon Reed, a former air quality specialist at Forest Service, for appearing before the committee today, and we thank you for being willing to share your story. Lastly, and perhaps most importantly, to those current and former Forest Service employees who have come forward, can't imagine the courage it takes to relive conduct this painful. Our committee, both sides and all members, want you to know you will be treated with dignity and respect. Your due process will be honored. Your confidentiality safeguarded. Do not ever think that there is nowhere to go, that no one to turn to, that no one will listen and take action. You can always come to this committee, and there is no election or change in leadership that will ever change that. With that, I would recognize the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Cummings.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And I want to thank you for calling today's hearing to examine sexual harassment and retaliation at the Forest Service. Let me say from the very beginning, Mr. Chairman, I associate myself with every syllable you just stated. You said it very eloquently, and I know that you mean it. Let me begin by thanking the thousands of employees working for the Forest Service, the Park Service, the Bureau of Land Management, and numerous other federal and state agencies who risk their lives every single day to fight the deadly fires spreading across our western states. Given the life-threatening risks that Forest Service employees regularly face in their careers, it's critical that we ensure that the Forest Service is a place where no one, absolutely no one, feels afraid to come to work because of what a coworker might do to them. This is simply unacceptable. Over the past 2 years, employees in the Forest Service have committed and continue to come forward to the media and to this committee to report sexual harassment and even sexual assault. They have expressed profound fear because of their reports. They may suffer retaliation, retribution that could limit or potentially even end their careers at the Forest Service. The Forest Service has made improvements in the processes it uses to receive and investigate allegations of harassment and bullying. But it is clear that 2 years later, many employees still believe the agency tolerates harassment bullying, and retaliation. Even worse, the Forest Service has not fully cooperated with the committee's oversight efforts. Documents provided in response to the committee's requests contain extensive, inappropriate redactions. They contradict the agency's claim it is committed to transparency. The productions also appear to be incomplete given the scope of the committee's requests. From information we do have, it appears that the Forest Service still has much work to do to ensure that the victims of harassment and bullying, particularly those working in remote areas, receive the support they need when they report assault or harassment. Today, we will hear from the Chief of the Forest Service, the Inspector General of the Department of Agriculture. And we will also hear from Shannon Reed, a former Forest Service employee, who alleges that she was the victim of harassment and then of retaliation after allegations were reported to the Forest Service leadership. I want to thank the Chairman for agreeing to my request to hear testimony directly from a witness who can tell us what it is really like to work for the Forest Service and to navigate its investigative process. I thank Ms. Reed for her courage, and I mean that, Ms. Reed, in coming forward and for your willingness to testify. You did not have to do this, but you're doing it. And you may not think that it's a big deal, but it's a major deal. Because you, by your testimony today, as the chairman alluded to, you are opening up the door for other women to come forward, other victims to come forward and stand up and say, we're not taking it anymore, and we are going to have high expectations when we walk into our jobs that we're going to be okay. One of the things that touched me in some of these hearings when we've dealt with sexual harassment, a lot of people think that it's just the victim, but they don't realize that their families are affected too. We have had people to come in here and sit where you sit, Ms. Reed, and tell us that when they would go home and talk to their husband, the husband would break down almost in tears because he felt helpless, because he wanted to help his wife or his significant other, but he felt like his hands were tied because they needed the income, they needed the job, and they were like in a corner trying to figure out, how do we get out of this? And so that's why the chairman said what he said, and he meant what he said, that on both sides of this aisle, we will stand up for you. We will protect you, and in the words we so often hear, we got your back. Today, more than ever, the Oversight Committee has a critical role to play in ensuring that federal processes for handling allegations of assault, harassment, and bullying are fair and timely, and that they truly protect an employee's rights. The committee must conduct thorough oversight over how agencies handle allegations of harassment and bullying. If agencies like the Forest Service fail to cooperate fully, the committee must consider alternative means to obtain complete and unredacted information. The committee also must ensure that the Forest Service will hold perpetrators fully accountable. The committee still has not received, Ms. Richardson, answers to even the most basic questions about allegations against the Forest Service Chief Tony Took, including how, listen to this, including how the allegations were raised, the specific nature of the allegations, and how they are being investigated. This is the Oversight and Government Reform Committee. Without information, we can't have oversight. And so I agree with the chairman. And I welcome you. That you're new, but now it's your watch. Did you ask for this job? You can shake your hand. I assume you asked. Well, you're there now, and and I congratulate you. But I remind you that you are here for a season and a reason, and it may very well be to make life better for other women, and so and any victim of harassment. And so I really want to thank you too for coming forward and saying, I'm up for the task. I'm going to make a difference. And by doing what you are doing, you have an opportunity right now to put your fingerprints on the future. And I thank you. So, finally, the committee must ensure that once investigations are completed, real reforms are made. It's not enough to get the information. We got to make some changes. As we move into the 116th Congress, I look forward to the committee conducting systematic and thorough investigations of the processes utilized at the Forest Service and throughout the government to receive and investigate allegations of harassment and bullying, to support and protect victims, and to ensure accountability. I also anticipate developing long overdue legislation to strengthen standards for these processes and to expand transparency as much as possible while protecting privacy. Federal employees have a right to work in an environment where they are not afraid of what a co-worker or supervisor might do to them, or what might happen if they report what that person has done. And we must have your back as you go about making the changes that you must make. Mr. Chairman, again, from the bottom of my heart, I do thank you for this hearing. You made a commitment that we would make this happen. You did. You kept your word, as you always do. And with that, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman from Maryland. He yields back. The chair notes the presence of our colleague from California, Ms. Jackie Spear. We appreciate your interest in the topic and welcome your participation today. I would ask unanimous consent Congresswoman Spear be allowed to fully participate in today's hearing. Without objection.
No objection. I have
The gentleman from Maryland.
And Congresswoman Lujan Grisham and Congressman Jehovah, I ask unanimous consent today be allowed to participate.
Without objection, so ordered. Pleased to introduce today's witnesses, Ms. Vicki Christensen, Chief of the U.S. Forest Service, the Honorable Phyllis Fong, Inspector General of the Department of Agriculture, and Ms. Shannon Reed, Air Quality Specialist and former employee of the U.S. Forest Service. Welcome. Pursuant to committee rules, all witnesses will be sworn before they testify, so I would ask you to please stand and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give should be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? May the record reflect the witnesses all answered in the affirmative. You may take your seat. In order to allow time for discussion and for the members, and I'm very grateful for the member participation this morning, for them to be able to ask questions, I would ask you to limit your opening statements to 5 minutes. Just understand the full body of your opening statement is in the record, and it will be read by the members. And there's a lighting system that will help you keep track of the time. When it gets to yellow, you'll have about a minute, and when it gets to red, then your 5 minutes is up. With that, Chief Christensen.
Chairman Gowdy, Ranking Member Cummings, and members of the committee, thank you for inviting me to account for our work to change the culture of the Forest Service so every employee works in a place free from harassment and retaliation. I look forward to working with you on this important endeavor. I have been in public service for my entire 38-year career as a forester and a wildland firefighter. I know what it means to encounter harassment, and discrimination in my workplace. As a young female firefighter in Washington State, I experienced firsthand inappropriate conduct that no individual should be subjected to. I know the deep anguish it causes. I know how it feels to fear retaliation. My past experiences fuel my commitment to the Forest Service. As the chairman said, I was interim chief for 7 months, and I've been a chief now for 1 month. I'm determined to do everything within my power to put us on a path towards no harassment. While I'm unable to respond to questions about specific individuals and cases, please know change is occurring in the Forest Service. Our employees can see it. This work is among the most important work we are doing and will ever do. We are coming to terms with our past. We are listening to employees, and we are learning from experiences they shared. More than 25,000 employees met with us in listening sessions across the country. Their stories were difficult to hear. They were humbling, but they are essential to our improvement. This is what we heard. Fear of retaliation is real. Employees don't speak up because they are afraid of retaliation. They said processes are too slow and lack transparency. Employees don't know where to go for help. They don't feel confident something will be done. Employees see inconsistencies in the way we hold people accountable. Some said we reward bad actors. They told us trust in supervisors has been diminished. In my 8 months, we have been facing up to hard truths. We have moved to take action on every front. We are overhauling systems and policies. We are doing better at holding bad actors accountable, and we are working to support employees who suffer harassment. We adopted and implemented a tighter anti-harassment policy. We've hired outside professional investigators to guard against bias and handling all allegations of sexual harassment. We opened a harassment reporting center staffed by outside personnel, and we're working on processes to better manage and respond to employee complaints. We are learning from and acting on what we heard. In my first 6 months, I formed an employee advisory group of employees across the country. They are new eyes and ears on the ground. We adopted a new code of conduct to be clear about our expectations for employee behavior. We are building skills and coaching supervisors so they intervene when they see inappropriate behavior. We created a work environment and performance office within the Office of the Chief. It's considered a best practice in federal government and the private sector. We will establish a victim advocacy and support structure. It will ensure employees receive compassionate support as they navigate the processes. Many past and recent actions focus on dealing with misconduct after the fact. We will dig deeper, and we will do more to upend harassment, retaliation, and bullying before it starts. That means going to the root of bad habits, attitudes, and conduct. We are putting a new performance standard in place for all supervisors. It raises accountability for them to stop misconduct before it escalates. I know our actions, past and present, are not enough. We must do more. Like you, I want lasting results. Progress will take longer than any of us wants, but I'm determined to lead permanent change in the Forest Service. We will not rest until this agency provides the safe, respectful workplace our employees deserve. I'm pleased to respond to any of your questions to the best of my ability. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Inspector General Fong.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Cummings, and members of this committee. We appreciate the opportunity to come today and testify, and we appreciate also the ongoing support of this committee for the oversight work that we do. Thank you for that. We in the Office of Inspector General regard the safety of USDA employees as one of our top priorities. This is true in the Forest Service as well as every other agency of the department, particularly when those employees are working in remote, isolated locations. So we have taken, with regard to the Forest Service, several steps to provide oversight to help the Forest Service address these very serious concerns. You have my full written statement, so I'll just briefly summarize. First of all, whenever we receive allegations of sexual assault or harassment, we initiate appropriate criminal investigations. It is our priority to address these allegations, particularly if physical assault is alleged. Over the past 10 years, we have initiated 13 investigations of these types of allegations, and we have received a number of penalties such as criminal convictions, removal or resignation of employees. Another initiative that we undertook in the last 2 years was we wanted to learn more from the Forest Service workforce themselves as to what the perceptions were about conditions in their workplace. And so we put together an independent survey of the Region 5 workforce. We issued a report last year which summarized a number of key points from that survey, and I think those key points are summarized in my full written testimony. We can talk about that in greater detail during this hearing. Finally, as you noted, we are committed to doing ongoing audit work to oversee the internal controls and processes that the Forest Service has undertaken within Region 5 in particular and across the agency as a whole where appropriate. Mr. Chairman, you mentioned the report we issued in March talking about the need for more independent investigators. We're pleased to report that the Forest Service agreed with our recommendation and is taking action on that. And as you note, we expect to issue our final report in the next 2 months. So I look forward to participating in this hearing and answering your questions, and would just note that we would not be able to comment publicly on ongoing investigative and audit work. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Fong. Ms. Reed.
Yes, before I give my testimony, I'd like to warn the members of the committee that the language in my testimony is explicit. Chairman Gotti, ranking members of committee, and the members of the committee, I thank you so much for inviting me here today to testify regarding to harassment, misconduct, and the retaliation at the U.S. Forest Service. My name is Shannon Reed. I live in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I am an air quality specialist. I have 20 years of experience. I have a bachelor's degree in meteorology from Texas A&M and a master's degree from University in environmental management at the University of Maryland at University College, UMUC. I worked for the federal government for 8 years as an air quality specialist. From 2010 to 2015, I worked for the National Park Service at the Grand Canyon National Park. From 2015 through 2018, I worked for the U.S. Forest Service in Region 8 and 3. The Grand Canyon National Park is a beautiful place to work, but the committee is aware of its dark history of employee abuse, particularly gender discrimination, sexual harassment, sexual assault, and rape. I observed this myself. At one point, I had to assist a female employee who had been raped by her male coworker. Park management did nothing to hold these perpetrators accountable, and he still works there. The reason I left the Grand Canyon National Park was to get away from supervisors and managers who harassed me, bullied me, and assaulted me, and retaliated against me when I reported it. Little did I know that transferring from the Park Service to the Forest Service, I was jumping from the frying pan to the fire. In October 2018, I was fired from my job at the Forest Service. I believe it was a reprisal for reporting harassment and for filing an EO complaint and for giving a sworn testimony that Chief Took sexually harassed and assaulted me. In February 2015, I started working as a GS-11 Zone Air Quality Specialist in Region 8 at the National Forest Service of Alabama in the Supervisor's Office in Montgomery, Alabama. I worked for forest for Alabama, Mississippi, and Florida. At the National Forest of Alabama, I was unwelcome as a female scientist and was seen as a sexual object. Male employees told me because I was a woman, I was not qualified for my job, I had no right to have a job, and a man should have my job. When taking a work capacity test, which is a physical test to qualify for fire assignments, I was tripped, pushed down, and kicked. One co-worker threatened to bend me over and spank me. Another told me in order to go to a fire assignment, I had to suck his cock. Another coworker told me that I would have to wear knee pads at a conference because I would be sucking so much cock. Another coworker told me that the only reason I was allowed to go to meetings was because I sucked my supervisor's cock. I was called little girl, a fucking bitch, whore, slut, and cunt on multiple occasions. I observed that this type of behavior was acceptable for the Forest Service. Everyday treatment for women. When I reported it, I was ostracized by both male and female employees. In October 2016, I traveled to Florida to attend a new employees orientation. The orientation was from October 25th to October 27th. At that time, Tony Took was the Region 8 Regional Forester. He gave a presentation at the orientation. Prior to the orientation, 2 different women came and warned me and said that I shouldn't be alone in a room with him or I shouldn't be alone in an elevator with him. I didn't know what they were talking about, but it was presumed that it might be something inappropriate. In October 25th, 2016, I went with a group of about 24, 25 attendees to a restaurant for dinner. Mr. Took was present. We were standing in the foyer in the restaurant waiting to be seated. Mr. Took was standing behind me, and he grabbed my butt. He didn't say anything. He just had this creepy smile on his face like he got away with something. I was stunned, but I didn't say anything. Several employees witnessed this and came over to me and protected me, and they basically took care of me the rest of the week. I would like to add that I spoke to 2 female employees in Florida who advised me that they had had improper sexual relationship with Tony Took. I'm not comfortable sharing any information than that because it is a small community and I don't want them to be retaliated against like I was for coming forward. In January 2018, the Daily Caller published an article exposing Tony Took's misconduct of having an affair with a subordinate employee. At that time, Mr. Took had been promoted to Chief of the Forest Service. In February 2018, Lisa Donnelly, Vice President of the USDA Coalition of Minority Employees, spoke with 3 women who had been sexually harassed by Tony Took. One woman gave Ms. Donnelly the name of the investigator who was investigating Tony Took's sexual misconduct. Her name was Joanne Dottie Ford. Ms. Donnelly contacted us in February of 2018. The Office of General Counsel was aware of my agreement to give Ms. Donnelly Ford a sworn statement because on or around February 22nd, 2018, Ms. Donnelly Ford told me that OGC advised her that Ms. Donnelly could not be present during my interview, even though she was my representative. The OGC attorneys were Tammy Trost, Arlene Leland, and Maria Schmidt. On March 1st, 2018, I gave my sworn testimony that Tony Took grabbed my buttocks. On March 2nd, 2018, PBS aired the expose of Chief Tony Took's sexual misconduct. On March 7th, 2018, Chief Tony Took announced that announced his early retirement based on allegations against him. I believe the USDA and Forest Service retaliated against me for giving the sworn testimony Tony took. In January 2017, I transferred to the Region 3 regional office in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I arrived in February 2017. My supervisor was Jack Tripty. The first week I arrived, Jack Tripty asked me out for drinks at a bar, and I declined. He also asked me if I wanted to go to the Truth and Consequences with him. At that time, I thought it was a bar, and I declined. I later discovered that he goes to Truth and Consequences because there are hot springs there. I found this out from other women who told me that they had been asked to go with him. In April 2017, Mr. Tripty called me at night, and it was not for business. He sounded intoxicated. I did not report Mr. Tripty because I was a new employee, and I did not want to start a new position in conflict with my supervisor. I also feared retaliation. From May 2017 through my time working for Mr. Tripty, he yelled at me, threatened me, spit in my face, inappropriately touched me, grabbed my phone from my hand. He yelled at me on multiple occasions to the point that I hyperventilated and started crying. Management witnessed some of these incidents and did nothing to stop it. On August 1st, 2017, I finally reported Mr. Tripty to my second-line supervisor, Bob Davis, and Jennifer Rule. Ms. Rule filed a complaint on my behalf with the Harassment Reporting Center. Mr. Tripty thought I filed it, and his harassment escalated. I filed an EO complaint against Mr. Tripty in October 2017. The harassment escalated even more. In November 2017, Mr. Tripty gave me a fully successful performance rating. However, at the meeting, he yelled at me for various reasons and threatened to give me a bad performance for firing me. In November 2017, an EO counselor filed another complaint with the Harassment Reporting Center on my behalf against Mr. Tripty. This was the second time that the agency officially filed a complaint against Mr. Tripty on my behalf. He retaliated against me, and the result in HART inquiries. HART is the Harassment Assessment Review Team that performs inquiries for harassment claims. Both inquiries resulted in an unsubstantiated finding, even though there were witnesses to Mr. Tripty yelling at me. I filed a second EO complaint against Mr. Tripty. Mr. Davis and Ms. Rule, Mr. Davis and Ms. Rule had witnessed Mr. Tripty's harassing and yelling at me on several occasions and still did nothing about it. So, subsequently to my EO complaint against Mr. Tripty, Mr. Davis, and Ms. Rule, my participation in HART inquiries and my affidavit on Chief Took, I received a 7-day suspension, a letter of instruction, and a letter of expectation for performance. I received a marginal performance rating at mid-year. Over the course of 2017 and 2018, Mrs. Donnelly sent dozens of emails to Secretary Perdue, Chief Took, Chief Christensen, and their staffs advising them of such incidents and requesting assistance. We never received a response. In May 2018, management decided to separate Mr. Tripty and I and initiated a personal misconduct investigation based on Ms. Donnelly's many requests to remove Mr. Tripty as my supervisor and have an investigation. He remained my supervisor, but we were not allowed phone or face-to-face contact. He continued to harass me by email. I was directed to use only a certain route in and out of the building. Otherwise, I had to stay in my cubicle. I was like I was under house arrest. Mr. Tripty was allowed free reign in the building, and he actually followed me to the restroom on multiple occasions. In May 2018, I was placed on a performance improvement plan, a PIP. HR, Employee Relations, and Ms. Rule advised me I would fail the PIP before the time frame was even up. It was a predetermined decision. I met the conditions of the PIP, but Mr. Tripty failed me anyway in August 2018. On August 30th, 2018, I was given a proposed removal letter. I was placed on administrative leave. This occurred an hour and a half after the Dateline preview was aired. And in the Dateline preview, I'm stating, it's not fear of retaliation, it's reality. I responded with a 30-page document explaining the depth of the 2 year of harassment and retaliation and evidence I had not failed the PIP. On October 10, 2018, HR emailed me a notice of removal. They did not even extend me the courtesy or the respect to provide it to me in person. I was fired by email. Ms. Donnelly received the email before I saw it. She called me to see how I was doing, and I didn't know I'd been fired until Ms. Donnelly told me. This was a clear example of animosity towards me. I was fired as reprisal for refusing to have a personal relationship with Mr. Tripty, for reporting 2 years of harassment and abuse, and for filing EO complaints, and for testifying against Chief Tony Took's sexual misconduct. I would like to make it clear that these actions took place at the time that Chief Christensen rolled out her March 2018 action plan to address harassment in the workplace. Ms. Donnelly would email Chief Christensen, Lago, and Weldon, and Velasco, describing the instances and pointing out that her plan was not addressing actual harassment and retaliation incidents against me and other women. They ignored Ms. Donnelly. Ms. Donnelly also provided this information to OGC Auditor Robert Brown. He told her that he would include information in their final. Chief Christensen's action plan is merely a check-in-the-box process to make the agency appear as if they are addressing sexual harassment, general harassment, bullying, and retaliation. It has no real application to preventing or eliminating harassment and retaliation against employees. Managers and supervisors are not being held accountable. Mr. Tripty was never held accountable despite the hundreds of pages of documents we provided the agency and named witnesses. The HART process is a failure. Internal employee relations personnel are still performing the inquiries. The inquiries officials do not provide accurate statements. They do not interview witnesses. I had 3 separate inquiries performed on Jack Tripty. They did not look at the pattern of harassment. They used the simplified HART process in lieu of a personal management investigation to minimize serious, ongoing complaints of abuse and sexual misconduct. HR makes the final decision. HR works for the management, and most decisions are harassment are substantiated. The stand-up sessions were nothing but smoke and mirrors. The agency is telling us to stand up and report harassment.
Ms. Reed, can I inquire how much longer? I do not want to cut you off, but we are going into the 15th minute.
I'm so sorry.
No. I don't want to cut you off. No member does. I want to be respectful to the folks that have questions for you. So. Okay.
Can I just finish the part about stand-up and listening sessions?
Sure.
Is that okay? Okay. So. Chief Christensen has not made it a safe environment for us to report the harassment. I've been told by other women that they will never report the harassment now that they saw what happened to me. 2 women I spoke to were being forced to have sex with their supervisors under threat of being trumped up for false charges and fired. They will not report it because they are afraid of losing their jobs. The listening sessions were a joke. Employees were required to attend while they were undergoing harassment. The harassers are sitting in on the sessions, and management pretends as if nothing happens. How can a person speak up at a session when a person that's harassing them is sitting right next to them? And I'll go ahead and skip to the end since we ran out of time. Ms. Christensen's action plan fails short, very short, of addressing the problem I identified here. As the Women's November 9, 2018 letter states, we have ideas and solutions that we want to share with Ms. Christensen. Accountability is the key issue. Changing the culture of reprisal is another key issue. We want to collaborate on a resolution that will prevent and eliminate harassment, sexual misconduct, and retaliation. We ask the Congress support on our request. We want to be a part of making the USDA Forest Service a place of respect, dignity, and equal opportunity for all employees. Thank you for your time today, and I would be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Reed. The gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Walker, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a list of questions, but I really don't even know what to say after listening to your testimony. In any arena or industry, when changes have to be made, there's usually someone that has to be the first person to walk through a very painful time. You didn't deserve it. You didn't ask for it. But I applaud your courage for being willing to do your best to see that changes are implemented. I can only hope that you have a very strong support group, whether it's through your faith or family or others, that continue to lift you up of all the hellacious things and comments and really beratement that you've went through. So I do applaud your courage for that today, and I'm glad you're here, Ms. Shannon Reed.
Thank you.
The Forest Service, Chief Christensen, has an important mission, certainly particular in light of the large fires that have ravaged the West in recent years. The agency also needs to attract talented, experienced employees. Have concerns surrounding the agency's ability to address sexual harassment and workplace misconduct hindered recruitment efforts or decreased applications to positions at the agency, particularly among the prospective female employees?
Thank you, Congressman. Having a safe, respectful work environment for every employee is absolutely essential to achieving our core mission. You couldn't be more spot on. And that's why we are so committed to this work. We have not seen a declining trend in our applicant pool because we are breaking the silence. We are opening up and saying, we have improvements to do. We have done some good work, and it's not enough. Yeah. We are doing more.
As a young pastor in my 20s, I remember sitting at the mega church I was privileged to serve at, and Dr. Gary Chapman, after I laid out my wonderful goals and objectives, the simple question that he asked me, well, how do you plan to accomplish all those lofty goals? So moving forward, are there any other steps Congress needs to take to assist you in accomplishing these lofty goals that you have to have a sexual harassment-free environment?
Yes, thank you, Congressman. There are things that you could certainly help us with. Untangling the Privacy Act, I'd say, is one of the first things. What we heard in the Listen and Learns is employees are frustrated. They can't get to the bottom line of what is happening, who's being held accountable, and what actions were taken.
Let me ask you, you said they isn't it you now? I mean, when you say they can't get to the bottom line, who can't get to the bottom line?
Employees don't have access. They want more access to information.
Why don't they have access?
The Privacy Act prohibits us from publishing the misconduct, the specific misconduct findings of an individual, and certainly then what penalty or discipline they received.
I don't know that I'm completely follow the Privacy Act as far as that's a cover for not exposing and going after those who have criminally broken the law, but maybe some of my other colleagues can delve into that a little bit. Are there any additional steps that you guys, Forest Service Chief Christensen, is considering taking to specifically address sexual harassment, misconduct, or retaliation? And let me add to this, and I'll let you answer both questions. As the chief, obviously, when you're in charge of something, there comes great responsibility. What message do you have for victims of sexual harassment and assault at the Forest Service? I'd like to hear from you specifically in those two areas.
To answer your last question first, my response is that what I am going to keep repeating, because I believe so deeply in my heart, we will not stop until everyone has a respectful, harassment-free workplace where every individual has an opportunity to thrive.
Sure.
And we are working on multi-pronged approach. It is absolutely accountability. We've put processes, structures, and system in place. They still need improvement, but we've put a lot in the last year. We're also working on victim advocacy and support, because it's so untenable that the folks need a place to go and sort this out, and how to build confidence that we can work on conflict early in the
My last question is this. I guess my comment is, we want to hear as a committee, these are the 3 things that we're going to do. These are the 5 things that we can do. My last question is, do you believe these things happen to Ms. Shannon Reed?
Congressman, I know this is difficult for Ms. Reed. I am just unable to comment on specific cases.
Thank you. You're back, Chair.
Gentleman yields back. The gentlelady from the District of Columbia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And can I thank you for having this follow-up hearing before your own retirement, so that we could see what has happened and what should happen. And I want to thank Ms. Reed for offering this testimony. Ms. Reed, I know how humiliating it must have been in the first place to experience this treatment, and then to have to talk about it, and to be willing to talk about it as it happened and not in veiled terms, is very important to this committee. What you have described here is more than the incidents affecting one victim. What I hear in your testimony is systemic, deep-rooted systemic problems if you happen to be a woman working with this agency. I'm a former chair of the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, who issued the guidelines on sexual harassment, which were then approved by the United States Supreme Court. And as the chief of the agency that heard such testimony as you have given, I can say that your testimony, your experience, is among the worst I have heard. I think it's about as bad as it comes. It's not about simply harassment. Your testimony reveals assault. It's well beyond what the public may have in mind when they think that somebody simply touches someone. Ms. Director, Chief Christensen, excuse me, you have heard her testimony about what amounts to systemic problems in the agency, fear of reporting. I recognize that you have become the full head only recently, but there is an action plan that has also been criticized in this testimony. So I have to ask you what you intend to do to arrest the pattern and practice of sexual harassment, which appears to be thoroughgoing in the Forest Service, in light of the fact that your own action plan has been deemed insufficient.
Thank you, Congresswoman. I absolutely agree what it's needed to arrest the pattern and do a complete about turn on what the standards of conduct are in this agency. As I said in my opening comments, I've taken one of my top senior officials, and we are establishing an Office of Work Environment and Performance. This is a leading agency standard for both government and the private sector. In that body of work, it's about our accountability. We've opened our call center. We're reviewing our anti-harassment policy, because there's some unintended consequences. It's requiring everyone to report if they see anything. But what we heard from our employees is that they want space to be able to talk. They want an advocate. So we have 2 contracts underway, one with Catharsis Production, who has done a considerable amount of work with the college campuses and Department of Defense. They're going to do a complete review of our
Your
harassment.
contract is with whom? Who did you say the contract was?
Catharsis Productions.
The what?
Catharsis Productions. And they'll be doing a complete review of our harassment prevention program, our policy, and the recommendations for the best way to put victim support and advocacy. And we are committed to investing, continuing to learn, and get the feedback loop.
Could I just ask you, under what circumstances are victims separated from their alleged perpetrators?
Yes, Congresswoman.
And who has the authority to do that?
The immediate supervisor is, and if the immediate supervisor is the one involved, it would be the next level supervisor is required to separate the alleged offender from the victim.
Well, Ms. Reed, did that occur in your case?
No.
Were any instructions given to the supervisor?
No, ma'am, that did not occur, and I had to sit in her listening session with my sexual harasser and tell my story.
Why was that the case, Ms. Chief Christensen?
I can't speak to that particular circumstance. Every employee that did not feel comfortable sitting with their work unit was given clear options to participate with a different work unit. And
she's shaking her head that was not the case.
Well, I apologize if that did not happen with Ms. Reed's circumstance. We did everything that we could do to make a comfortable setting for all employees to be able to start to break the silence. No one was required to talk. No one was required to tell their story. Additionally, we had civil rights or employee rights professionals in separate rooms. If someone did not want to speak in their small work unit, they could go privately and talk to a civil rights professional.
General Aid's time has expired. The gentleman from Montana is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to start by thanking Ms. Reed for being here today. My hope and prayer is that your courage in telling your story will be a turning point for us in correcting the culture at the Forest Service. So I appreciate you very much.
Thank you.
Coming from the private sector, building an organization, you know, we had zero tolerance for sexual harassment in the workplace, and it was something that we acted on immediately when it occurred, if it occurred, to the point where people were escorted out of the building the same day, because you just have to get to the bottom of it and root it out. Chief Christensen, since our last hearing, the Forest Service has implemented a new complaint and investigation system. You share a number of those statistics on your website that are publicly available, clearly without identities, but it does give some indication. I want to ask you a few questions about that, if I could. How many complaints has the system received since August of 2017?
Yeah, we've received just shy of 1,500, 1,490 complaints.
Okay. And how many of those complaints have been investigated?
Well, they're all being investigated. How many have been completed investigations? There's been 816 completed, or 55%.
Okay. And what percentage of the ones that have been investigated have actually substantiated misconduct?
Yeah, it's just under 24% of all categories of harassment have substantiated misconduct.
Okay. And of those that have been investigated and you've substantiated misconduct, how many of those were sexual in nature?
The substantiated sexual harassment was, let me see, that's at about 13% for sexual harassment, and no, excuse me, substantiated. For sexual harassment, 58% have been substantiated.
Okay. And I have to ask the question, have you been punishing these people have you been taking? What actions have you taken?
For all substantiated misconduct, there is a form of discipline. All the removal, suspension, demotions, letter of reprimands, and a variety of other corrective actions for first-time, lesser offenses.
And have you taken actions in all cases where there's been substantiated sexual harassment?
Yes, Congressman, in all cases.
Okay. And can you commit to this committee that you will have a zero-tolerance policy towards these substantiated cases as you investigate them?
I can commit to that because that's what we have, an absolute zero-tolerance policy.
Okay. We had a chance to meet before this hearing, and we both agreed that's got to be the rule. There can be zero tolerance. I recognize you've just taken the reins recently, but this is of grave concern to this committee, that we have a culture where people can thrive and they can be safe in their work environment. And I know in our discussions prior, you seem committed to that, but you've also said there's more work to do. I want to follow on Mr. Walker's question. Is there any further authority you need or statutory changes to continue to develop this reformed and better culture at the Forest Service?
Yes, thank you, Congressman. And I just want to clarify that the Privacy Act, misconduct does not fall under the criminal law. So therefore, all results of misconduct are not made public due to the Privacy Act. So that's the connection. And if we're trying to create more transparency and, as you and I discuss, really demonstrate the accountability, we need some work in the Privacy Act. Additionally, untangling the disciplinary process. We want to take swift action. We know both the alleged and the alleger are absolutely are owed their due process.
If I could follow on that. So when you substantiate sexual harassment, are there policy or statutory issues that stand in your way of taking disciplinary action?
No, it's the amount of time probably that we need, that we would be willing to work on the committee. I am not the expert on these things, but we'd really love to engage in more dialogue.
From the private sector, I know once something is substantiated, the investigation's been done, the action should be swift and appropriate. We'd love to have some follow-on input from you on what those specifics are so we could give you the tools you need. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentlelady from New York is recognized, Ms. Maloney.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member, for calling this meeting. And I also would like to thank my colleagues that have made combating sexual harassment part of their life's work, a priority in their work in Congress, Ms. Norton and Ms. Spear for their leadership. And I particularly want to thank all the panelists, but particularly Ms. Reed for speaking up, because too often when women speak up, they become victimized again, as you were. You were fired, you were harassed more, and as you testified so movingly, many women told you, I will never speak up because I saw what happened to you when you stood up for your dignity and for your personal respect. Now, I want to get to specifics about this letter that, did you sign this letter that a coalition of minority employees in the USDA at the Forest Services signed? There were 50 women. Notably, some of them were anonymous because they did not want to be retaliated against as you were. Did you sign this letter November 9th?
Yes, ma'am.
You did sign it. And this letter was sent to you, Chief Christensen. I first of all want to know if I can have unanimous consent to place the letter in the record. It is riveting. I urge all members of this committee to read it, and the public may have unanimous consent to place it in the record.
Without objection.
Well, this letter was sent to you, Chief Christensen. Do you recall getting it?
Yes, Congresswoman.
And what did you do about it when you got it?
I received it over this weekend. I do have to say I spent all of the weekend dealing with the tragedies happening on the wildfires in California. And we are absolutely open to have any employee.
Well, Ms. Reed, did you receive any response from this letter? Did they have the courtesy to respond to you and the other 50 minority women who signed it?
No, ma'am.
No, you did not. And I would like to see, if you have a copy of it, I'd like to present it to you again, Chief Christensen, and ask you to respond to the points that they raised in the letter. If you're not going to respond to them, would you respond to this committee? Most people respond in agencies to letters.
Yes, Congresswoman, I'd be glad to. As I said, I received it.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. The letter expresses many concerns with the Listen and Learn stand-up training session. And I want to read a quote from it that was particularly, I thought, moving. Though many of us spoke up during the Listen and Learn stand-up sessions, many of us did not. Many of us observed that managers with harassment claims against them, including sexual harassment, were the ones who put the meeting together. They facilitated the sessions. Regardless, we were required to attend. We saw managers and supervisors joking, laughing, and making snide comments about sexual harassment issues. This doesn't sound like a listening session to me, Chief. This sounds more like a harassment session. We sat there and listened to management. Employees blame the women. They're the problem. And blame the press. Blame PBS for having to go through these processes. Blame PBS for putting a spotlight on a terrible abuse of American employees in our country. Intimidating and demeaning comments were made in front of the women who had been interviewed by PBS. It was not a safe environment for us to speak up, and we want you to understand we have real concerns that through your stand-up program, you are putting the burden on us to stand up and speak out about harassment when you have not made it a safe environment for us to do so. And I might add, you didn't protect them from being fired for standing up and speaking out about personal abuse to their dignity and to them as people. She was fired, is that correct? Now, Ms. Christensen, how do you respond to the concerns about the women and what they said in this stand-up program? Now, let me tell you, my time's running out. I'd like you to respond in writing. I really would. Now, if you, get it to us in writing. So, Ms. Reed, I want to give you the remaining time to speak. Your November 9th record and letter to the chief states, and I quote, "Your processes are designed to be check-the-box actions with little actual intent to hold the harassers accountable." So how can the Forest Service go beyond what you view as a check in the box and come forward with real reform? And I'd like to add, Ms. Christensen, will you be willing to meet with me and other like-minded members of Congress, male and female, on the concerns that she raised so that we can look at this long-standing problem and try to correct it? And I'd like to give my remaining time, that's not much, to Ms. Reed to tell us what you think could be real reforms that could protect workers in the work environment.
Well, first
Gentlelady is out of time, but you may answer.
Okay. First of all, I think that the Forest Service needs to get rid of the HART program altogether. It is a waste of time and a waste of the tax dollars' money. Second of all, they have proved they can fire people. In my case, why don't we fire the perpetrators? And let's stop letting them retire and get full benefits.
That sounds like excellent advice. Thank you.
Gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Hurd's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Reed, I'm an Aggie. I'm proud to be an Aggie today.
Whoop.
Gig 'em. I'm proud to be an Aggie today because it means I have a small association with someone as tough as you. So thanks for being here today.
Thank you.
And Ms. Christensen, Chief Christensen, I actually want to follow up on something that Ms. Reed alluded to. This committee, in a bipartisan way, we passed the Official Personnel File Enhancement Act back in 2016, that required agencies to make permanent notations in the personnel records of an employee who is the subject of a personnel investigation and resigns from that agency prior to the resolution of that personnel investigation. Has the Forest Service complied with this law for all 13 individuals who resigned prior to disciplinary action?
I cannot, with complete accuracy, answer your question about the 13. What I can tell you is that we are very appreciative of the work that Congress did. The Office of Personnel Management has recently put the rules in order, and we are all up for and completely going to comply with putting that in the records of folks that voluntarily retire.
So, Chief, you say you can't answer that question just because you're not aware of the information, or is that a question you can answer for this committee in writing after this hearing?
We can answer in writing. I just don't have the time frames of your particular
we would welcome that. That should be something that you should be able to pull fairly quickly. We would love to see that within the next week. Inspector General Fong, Region 5, I know that's California. There were almost half the employees there said that they expressed some level of mistrust in the Forest Service's sexual harassment and sexual misconduct complaint process. Can you give us some more details on that? Can you push?
Sorry about that. Yes, we're talking about the survey that we did in 2018, and we did receive feedback that many employees feared retaliation, and that many who reported that they had experienced harassment were afraid of reporting it because of the potential for retaliation.
And can you elaborate on the OIG's recommendations in your interim report on how to address this?
When we issued the survey to Forest Service, we did not make recommendations in that report. Now, we did an additional report that you're referencing about the investigative process, where we recommended to Forest Service that they use investigators who are independent, more independent, not Forest Service employees, in order to build and address potential perceptions.
So how does that address, and I guess this question is for you, Chief, how does that address the fact that almost half the employees in one sector believe that there's mistrust in these policies?
Yeah, I would put a time reference to that. The survey was done, and then the recommendations came out, and we immediately implemented the recommendations for third-party investigators to absolutely eliminate any of the concern of bias. So that was implemented in March.
So continue to investigate a problem that you know exists. How does that change the culture within Region 5?
That's one action, Congressman. To change a culture is multi-pronged. This is one action to show responsiveness, that we have transparency and confidence in the process. This alone is not going to change the culture.
Inspector General Fong, in my remaining 45 seconds, why does it take so long to go through one of these investigations and ultimately fire people that you find is actually conducting sexual harassment?
Well, as you know, we do many investigations. If there are allegations of criminal conduct, we need to work through our investigative process, interview all the appropriate witnesses, look at documents, et cetera. The key piece of this is that we need to coordinate with prosecutors. It can be a Department of Justice prosecutor or a state and local prosecutor, and that partnership is key. The prosecutor is the one who determines the course of the investigation and whether or not they will ultimately bring an action, a lawsuit, a complaint, and file. And so that whole process can take more time than anybody would like.
Mr. Chairman, I yield back a time I do not have.
The gentleman from Texas yields back. The gentlelady from Michigan, Ms. Lawrence, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Chief Christensen and Inspector Fogg, Were any of the incidents shared in these media reports new allegations or which you were not previously aware? Ms. Christensen.
I'm not sure which media allegations, Congresswoman, you are referring to, but I'm going.
Let's go with the PBS NewsHour's report on March 1st, 2018.
Yeah.
34 women.
I did not take over as interim chief until March 9th, so I was not aware, and they all happened previously.
So there was no record of any accountability to this public record of 34 women. So when you came in, there was no action or response to this?
I'm sorry, Congresswoman, I misinterpreted your question. Yes, there is a record. I thought you were personally asking me if I was aware.
Okay, so you're saying that all of the women who came forward, there were actual complaints on file that the company was aware of, correct?
I believe so, yes.
Okay, I don't know why that's so difficult. So for the Inspector General, can you answer that question? Were you aware that these incidents, were they new allegations, or were you aware of them? Were you investigating them?
It's our practice policy not to comment on any investigative work that we may be doing or may not be doing in order to protect the process.
So have formal complaints that's been filed with this HEART system or any harassment reporting system within the Forest Service or the IG's office as a result of any of these allegations that were presented in the media reports? And I think you're saying that you can't respond if you're investigating or not. Is that correct?
We do not publicly confirm whether or not we have an investigation.
So let's use the vague term that you want to use. Has the complaints, I don't need names, has the complaints that we know about, because they were made public on TV, so there's no issue of confidentiality, have they been investigated? And overall, without saying names, what is the status of the investigation?
It may be helpful if I offer some comments about how we go about our work.
You're speaking very slowly, and I have a short period of time, so I
Okay.
need you to be concise.
When we receive information, we assess that information. If it involves allegations of assault, criminal conduct, we make that a top priority. We will interview the people we need to interview.
So what if it's harassment? So that's not assault, and that's not, so if it's a harassment complaint, do you handle it at all, or it doesn't come to you?
If people bring those complaints to us, we will assess it to see if there's an issue of assault or not. If there is no assault aspect, we will then work with the agency to get those looked at.
Will you please respond to this?
Yes, I can confirm that all 34 cases that were aired on PBS have been investigated, all of the allegations.
So and what's the status? Have they been totally processed and action taken?
We can get you the precise, I don't want to misspeak, but they were quite a while ago, so yes, they are well into process, if not completely closed.
Okay. My next question is to Ms. Reed. Ms. Reed, you're familiar with the 34 women, and you know about this HEART system. Would you agree that every single complaint that was brought forward has been investigated?
No, ma'am, I don't think they have been. And by the way, I'm one of the 34.
I know.
So, no, they haven't.
Okay. So just for a point of reference, I was an EO investigator and a manager of HR, and there has to be accountability. And I'm looking at this significant steps and unwavering commitment report that we received. And one of the things it says is appointed a senior executive to oversee the new Office of Work Environment and Performance. Is that position in place?
Yes, it's in place, and Ms. Leslie Weldon, sitting behind me, is that new director.
So as a new director, is this person responsible for the accountability piece, or is it, what happens because you now have a senior person? You're adding layers of management to this, and I'm concerned that the layers of management is not resulting in results. And this will be my last question. I recognize that. Thank you, Mr.
I'll be quick. I appreciate your concern, and that was ours as well, to carefully set this office up. It is every supervisor's responsibility to oversee appropriate accountability. Ms. Weldon and the Office of Work Environment is about making sure we are on point on all three prongs: accountability, victim advocacy and support, and permanently changing the culture of the agency.
I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Chief Christensen, I usually go last, but I'm going to break that precedent today. I found a couple of things you said in your opening to be very instructive. Number one, if I heard you correctly, you're a lifelong government employee. You are new to your current role, officially about a month, unofficially less than a year. I think what struck me the most was that you yourself have experienced some of the conduct that is being discussed today. And don't want to pry, don't want to ask about anything you don't want to talk about, other than how you think your background qualifies you, your experience qualifies you to be able to address what I think everyone concedes are current and previous problems with Forest Service.
Thank you, Congressman. I don't want to, everyone's experience is their own experience, so I don't want to say I know how people feel, but I know I have an experience, and I know what commitment that brings for me. There's a long legacy of great conservation work, and there are great women, people of color, of all races that contribute to that work, and they absolutely have to have the right, safe place to contribute that work. That's what gives me my fuel and my commitment, is from my experience. We have come a long way. It's shame on us if we don't move the needle on how women and minorities are treated. It is our time to permanently upend the long-rooted behaviors and norms, and that's what I'm committed to do because I have an experience. And I'll just say one other very personal thing. 10 days after I became interim chief, I became a grandmother for the first time to a little girl. And I am doing this for all little girls. It's about the future, and I am committed.
Chief, I think sending a clear, unmistakable message that what have been tolerated in the past will no longer be tolerated is vital. But if I were the victim of either past or current harassment, I would be even more interested in the actions that are being taken. What have you done since you started, unofficially and or officially, to ameliorate this problem?
We've added additional capacity because the reporting harassment call center has gone up. We think that's an indication that folks are starting to feel a little more comfortable about reporting. We know we have more to go, so we're working on our processes. We are we established a code of conduct for the entire agency. We broke the silence. It's just a beginning. It's not an end, and it is not a check the box on listen and learn for over 25,000 employees. And then when all the seasonals came on, 6 weeks later, we did a stand-up for everyone where they received absolutely clear anti-harassment training, code of conducts, and anchored to the values of this agency of this is who we are. We've opened up and started with sincerity the Office of Work Environment and Performance. The EEOC has named that as an agency, as a standard for government and private industry. We are introducing bystander intervention training and coaching. We are in the throes of finalizing retaliation prevention training and conduct, and this victim advocacy and support infrastructure. And finally, we are conducting an agency-wide assessment, because we need, the listen and learns only opened up part of the dialogue. We need to know what's really going on in the culture, and we need to set a baseline so we can measure ourselves on how we're improving. We have many other steps in mind for the future, but those are the things that are actively putting in place now.
Inspector General Fong, in the time I have remaining, I applaud anyone who thinks that you should have professional investigators, particularly given this unique crime. Victim advocates, fantastic. I'm trying to think of the best way to say this in a legal way. How in the hell can you have the perpetrator in the room with the victim? How does that happen, and what steps can be taken to make sure that doesn't happen? I can't think of anything that has a more chilling effect on someone being able to tell their story than to have the perpetrator present. So for those of us who can't fathom how that happens, how does it happen, and what steps can be taken to make sure it doesn't happen again?
I understand your concern, and what I would say is that we want to send a very clear message in our office that if people have concerns or issues that they would like to bring forward, that we have multiple ways and multiple avenues where we can help people. We have a hotline, as you know. We have a special investigations office that we've set up to address these kinds of things. We also house the whistleblower coordinator for the department, who is available to talk to employees about different options that may be available to them to address their situation in the moment. And I think that's a very important message to get out to everyone.
The gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Clay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you and the ranking member for conducting this hearing. And Ms. Reed, you testified that before joining the Forest Service, you worked for the National Park Service at Grand Canyon National Park. This committee previously held a hearing to examine allegations of harassment and retaliation at the Grand Canyon. You testified that you witnessed and experienced sexual harassment, bullying, and retaliation at the Park Service. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And you transferred from the Park Service to the Forest Service in order to get away from that hostile environment. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
You started off in the Forest Service in Region 8, but you claimed that you were touched inappropriately by former Chief Tony Took while he was the regional forester. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
You then transferred from Region 8 to Region 3. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
But shortly after you arrived in Region 3 in February of 2017, you claimed that your supervisor tried to have an improper personal relationship with you. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And you refused your supervisor's advances. Is that true?
Yes, sir.
And what happened after that?
I was retaliated against.
You were retaliated against. And then did you report his actions right away?
Yes, I did.
And
actually, sir, I'd like to correct that.
Go ahead.
My deputy director actually reported it to the HART program.
Okay, to the HART program. You testified that an agency official, your deputy director, filed a HART complaint against your supervisor on your behalf in September of 2017. Then you filed an EEO complaint the following month, and in November, an EEO counselor filed another Hart complaint on your behalf. What happened to you after these reports were submitted?
I was suspended for 7 days.
You also said, yeah, you were suspended for 7 days in March of 2018. Prior to your suspension, you were rated fully successful in your performance appraisals for the 3 prior fiscal years, 15, 16, and 17. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Do you think your suspension was in retaliation for your reports of sexual harassment?
Yes, sir. I think it was the reporting, the Hart, the EO, and reporting about Tony Took.
Okay, let me see if I understand this, Ms. Reed. You left the Park Service to find a safe place to work where you didn't have to worry about being sexually harassed. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And then you thought the Forest Service would give you a fresh start, but it turned out that your transfer from the Park Service to the Forest Service was, in your words, quote, jumping from the frying pan into the fire. Do I have that right?
Yes, sir.
No employee should ever feel scared to come to work in the federal government or fear retaliation for reporting harassment or bullying. And I'm sorry that you have had to make so many moves to try to find a safe place to work. And in 2018, I think that's ridiculous. And it should not be tolerated by this government or in any workplace. And so I just feel as though you have been given a raw deal. And what would make this right? What do you think should happen in this instance?
I think the Forest Service should fire the perpetrators.
And deal with them effectively.
Yes, sir.
And rid that agency of these perpetrators and these predators. And so, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member, I think that is the only solution that would right this wrong, and hopefully Chief Christensen hears us, and hopefully the adequate action will be taken to rid your agency of these predators. And if you want to respond, go right ahead.
Thank you, Congressman. I absolutely agree. I can assure you that every allegation has a full investigation. I just want to be clear, the harassment risks are, the Hart team takes the minor bullying and non-sexual cases, and they do an inquiry. Anything that is sexual harassment goes to a full certified investigator. And we are absolutely committed to ensure those investigations are upright, foremost, and protect the due process of both the alleged and the alleger.
And thanks, but my time is up, but there has to be serious consequences for these actions.
I agree, Congress.
I yield back.
The gentleman from Missouri yields back. The gentleman from Wisconsin.
Yeah, I had to step out for a second. Chief Christensen, do you believe the allegations or the story told by Ms. Reed?
Congressman, I'm unable to make any comment about any specific cases.
Okay. One of the things that you said that kind of amazed me, you said progress would take a long time to change the culture. You think it's going to take a long time to change the culture there?
Congressman, I would like to say I could change it in 6 months. But to be absolutely honest, I don't think you change a culture of an organization that's existed for 113 years, that has 40,000 people, that has a mission of getting a critical job done in remote locations overnight. We're going to work with stead and with haste to break through to change the parts of the culture that I see as most important.
I just don't buy that. I mean, there are all sorts of businesses or organizations all around the country, and I don't think any of them would put up with something like this. I mean, unless you're hiring people who are a lot less on the ball than everybody else in the world. I don't know. And in other areas of society, we come up with new rules all the time. These rules are always in effect anyway, but people are expected to adapt with them on Monday. And to say that behavior that would be completely aberrant anywhere else in society, I assume they know it's aberrant. Do they hide their behavior when they do it, or they come and say, what's wrong? I didn't know this was wrong. I mean, I would assume they hide it or contest it or whatever. I just think you're going too slow. You really feel that people in that agency don't realize this behavior is wildly wrong? They
Yes.
don't know it?
Congressman, I think we're speaking two different things about culture. That we are absolutely setting the expectations and putting everything in place about holding anyone that is found of substantiated misconduct accountable, that we are setting the expectations for what's the behavior is, that we have performance accountability for all supervisors and all employees, absolutely. When I talk about culture, I talk about the front end as well, that everyone is being an ally for each other, that it's a thriving organization, that we know what the norms are and the standards are. That takes a little bit of time because you don't just legislate culture. We are going after the back end of this with all the haste, and if you have additional suggestions, I am all ears, Congressman. We really do want your help.
Well, I don't understand how we're, in my opinion anyway, everywhere else in society, these expectations are realistic, and I don't know why, if you're going to change how quickly people are disciplined or whatever, why you just can't say things are different on Monday and people adapt. I'm not thinking any other employer, changes come down, not just here, but other places as well. You just say, okay, you know, this is the way it's going to be from here on out, you know, either leave or whatever. And I don't know why the culture, I mean, do people think this sort of demanding of sexual favors is the norm?
No, no.
I mean, I don't understand how this.
No, Congressman. I do really have to speak for the 40,000 employees. Most of the employees are excellent public servants. Just like any a large population, there are people that are not doing the right thing. They are not respecting each other, and that is not okay. And we have established a very specific code of conduct, and we are holding people accountable to that code of conduct.
Ms. Fong, I'll ask you a question because I'm almost out of time. Do you buy into this time that it's going to take apparently months or years for these people to figure it out? Do you think for some reason the Forest Service employees can't figure out that things had better change like yesterday? Could you comment on that, apparently?
I think they are hearing the message today from all of us on the witness panel that this is a zero-tolerance situation and that we stand ready to assist people who have concerns.
Well, it's still what I'm taking out of this hearing is we still have low standards at the Forest Service, but thanks anyway. I've used my 5 minutes.
The gentleman from Wisconsin yields back. The gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for this hearing. I want to follow up a little bit on the questions just preceded me and then cite a specific example and ask Ms. Reed to respond and Ms. Christensen. Ms. Christensen, I appreciate the tenor you bring, the commitment you have to a career, and specifically to your comments you just made about all the good people who work for your agency, the vast majority. So someone has some experience in my other career in the business sector. The way to change cultures is all the things you've said, but ultimately there have to be specific consequences, and Ms. Reed got to this. That due process, prevention and intervention, the ultimate way to change culture for all those other good people is to demonstrate that the people who are guilty of bad behavior are terminated. and have significant consequences. In my experience and significant experience looking at human factors in other professions, people have to be held accountable, not admonished to do the right thing, but when they've been found guilty, they have to be terminated, and that has to be a consequence for the rest of their existence for the other people who do the right thing. So a specific example, first to Ms. Reed, your performance improvement plan seems to me a wonderful tool when used properly by management to correct a situation. In May of 2018, you were issued a performance improvement plan which would set all kinds of red flags to me if I was in management that seems to be overt in its retaliatory tone. So for instance, a quote from this, you were directed, all email must be open, read, and appropriately responded to daily within 4 hours of receipt and prior to you signing off for the day, unless that email is received at the end of your shift. Had you ever had any problems with being responsive to email prior to this admonishment in this PIP?
No, sir.
Okay. Another quote from this 2018 report. I expect you to be working at your desk at all times with the exception of brief trips to the restroom, I don't know how you define that, print room, etc., scheduled project or program meeting calls, and short breaks, one break in the morning and another in the afternoon, 15 minutes or less. Have you ever had problems with being at your desk and performing your tasks?
No, sir.
Did you take those as being retaliatory, that kind of comments?
Yes, sir.
Seems pretty obvious to me. The previous review in 2016, quote, talking about you, she demonstrates a commitment to personal responsibility to strive for excellence in the accomplishment of work assignments that are aligned with and ultimately contribute to the achievement of the agency's missions and goals. How could you go from a review like that and then come forward and tell the truth and get this other review and not obviously think that that was retaliatory and the message it sent to your coworkers? Seems pretty overt to me. And were there consequences for this for your superiors?
There was no consequences for my superiors. It would just be, I just got the consequences.
So, Ms. Christensen, respond to that. I mean, this is May of 2018, this year. We can talk about changing a culture forever, but here's a way to change a culture. These people should be terminated, and they should have due process, but admonishing them isn't sufficient, in my view.
Congressman, I'm sorry, but I cannot speak to the specifics.
Speak in general.
In general?
If you had a review like this, what would you do?
If we have, we will review every allegation of harassment. We do. And if there is a finding of misconduct, we hold the person accountable.
Define that. How do you hold them accountable? How many people have been terminated?
In the last 3 years, we've terminated 634 people. Now, let me say, there are times when the bar of actual misconduct is not reached. That doesn't mean there's not some conflict. And we know that's an area that we are working on. We are working on more training for supervisors on how to get in front of this and deal with conflict early. Because just because someone had a finding of no misconduct doesn't mean there's not a problem. And those are the things that are about the whole system that we're addressing. But I can assure you, our processes, our investigations are from quality investigators, and we do everything to substantiate misconduct and then do the appropriate discipline accordingly.
So just as an observation, I really want to be supportive to your career and your commitment to this, but the real telling part, I think, is the consequences. It seems to me you have appropriately emphasize what you've done to change the culture in terms of due process. But to me, that sort of demonstrates a bias towards the accused in this instance. So just as my observation, for the future, I think it's good that there have been consequences, and I don't want people to be dismissed who are innocent. But you set up that due process, and the way to change the culture, in my view, is to demonstrate to the people who are doing the right thing that the people who are doing the wrong thing are terminated. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman from California yields back. The gentleman from Alabama is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chief Christensen, is that your first grandchild?
Yes, sir.
So you've got a lot of fun ahead of you.
Thank you.
Create a lot of problems for her parents. So, but I really appreciated you bringing that in, making it as personal as it was, because this is personal. It's personal for everybody who's experienced it, and no one should have to experience that. My question to you is what can Congress do to help you address the accountability issues at the U.S. Forest Service?
Well, I've already mentioned the Privacy Act, but let me go on, and you've already helped us with the records on personnel file. I think we can untangle just a little bit more so it's not so difficult. But, you know, a multi-agency panel, I take all the responsibility for the Forest Service, but we are not the only agency or even private sector company that are really dealing with this. And I think there's some shared learning, some shared leverage, and Congress could potentially help us convene a high-level panel. I don't know if that's through GAO, but we are committed to continuous improvement, and I think other organizations are. I've been contacted many times because of the things that we are doing. They're not perfect, but we are doing things. So I think a shared opportunity with Congress to support where we need to go and what we want to do would be very helpful.
In that regard, are you interacting with other agencies to share this information and best practices? I guess that's the best way to put it, in a best practices sense.
Yes, we are on several fronts within the other agencies and wildland fire response and just other federal agencies, and several of my former colleagues in state agencies are reaching out to us to really to learn what we're doing and how we see a path ahead.
We had a hearing on this previously in which the testimony of a couple of witnesses to me, and I'm not a prosecutor, but just it seemed to me that it was not sexual harassment, it was assault, and it should have resulted in a criminal charge. Have you seen any, I'm not asking you specifically, I'm asking you in general, if something rose to that level, would there be criminal charges?
Yes, actually, we have received allegations throughout our history of criminal activity, and when we find that, when we do the fact-finding and find that there has been assault or rape or other criminal misconduct, we take that to a prosecutor and work with them to bring that through the justice system.
And in that hearing, I think one of the witnesses testified that someone was in the field and was grabbed around the neck and thrown to the ground. I don't know what happened in that case, but there was another case where I felt like it was criminal, and the individual involved was allowed to retire and then brought back as a consultant. Are you aware of cases like that where someone has been brought back into the service not as an employee but as a consultant?
I'm not aware of specific situation that you're talking about, but in general, if we are working on a criminal issue and we take it to a prosecutor, regardless of whether the employee remains with the agency or retires, that criminal process moves forward.
Well, I want to go back to Chief Christensen. Do you have the tools that you need to hold those who retire or resign accountable?
Thank you, Congressman. There is some additional things that I think we can do to streamline the putting on their personnel record. It's a right that employee has to resign. We cannot prevent them, but we do finish the process, and we would like to have the outcomes of that process or investigation stick with that former employee. And it's a bit of a cumbersome process, so some help in untangling that would be appreciated.
I think it would be important that if they are able to retire or resign, that they not be able to get back on the payroll as a consultant. Mr.
Yes.
Chairman, I appreciate the opportunity to ask questions, and I yield back.
Gentleman from Alabama yields back. The gentlelady from New Mexico is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me to participate in this hearing. Chief Christensen, I have the distinct honor as a congresswoman now and as a future governor to represent Ms. Reed, and appreciate her courage very much today for being here. And it was important for me to tell you that directly, that without your courage and that of so many others, we will not get this culture shift addressed, and we will not be able to protect individuals and create an environment that we all want on this committee, that respects the workers in public service and the goal and mission of the Forest Service. And while I've appreciated many of your responses about work that now is ongoing, I have to tell you that in a leadership role, what I didn't hear from you, that in addressing culture change, in addition to all the strategies that we've been discussing today, you have to take a zero-tolerance policy. And you have to be clear about that as the leader of that organization. And if you aren't and can't articulate or communicate that, no other effort will get it done, including the fact that you are chilling being able to address these issues because you aren't changing the retaliation culture. And given that, I want to let you know, and Mr. Chairman, I have a letter that I wrote before Ms. Christensen was in her position to the Forest Service talking about incredible numbers of complaints to my office from individuals and employees who, for fear of retaliation, won't give us their names, are incredibly disturbed. And I'd like unanimous consent to place this letter in the record.
Without objection.
And I want to let you know that this letter that we wrote in April of this year, I never got a response. And in fact, in other communications with the Forest Service has misled me by referring to the fact that they have no issues that they're aware of related to retaliation when I can check and see the number of EEOC and related investigations that are going on. So just to give you a sense about how deeply this culture needs to be addressed, in addition to the hostile work environment that has been occurring there for decades, the culture of lying and misrepresenting not only to members of Congress, but to your employees and coworkers and other departments is also incredibly troubling and ongoing. And you're in a tough job because our expectation is going to be that you're going to resolve this, and until you stand up and say, every tool at my disposal, including termination, I will have a zero-tolerance policy, your culture will not change, and people will not come forward because they're trapped in an environment where they will be immediately punished and bullied by their coworkers. You've got an environment where you have other leadership personnel that are promoting that environment, not telling you the truth, and certainly are not participating, it looks to me, in a productive way with even the recommendations that you've implemented by the Inspector General if you're having the alleged abuser in the same environment through those processes, which tells me that the folks inside the department are winning this effort in spite of your attention to this matter. And I'm really concerned. And until the entire department is clear, I worry that this committee will have to do more work to assure that we are protecting individuals and employees and their families. And so I'd like you to speak to that you're going to promote a zero tolerance, and perhaps that you would routinely report back to this committee, because, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member, my office has received completely dissatisfactory responses, and as I mentioned to you, and you will see in that letter, they've misled us about the information they have at their disposal.
Congresswoman, thank you. Thank you. If I was not clear about zero tolerance, that is good feedback, because that exactly is what I intended to say.
You are not clear. So this would be.
Yeah, yes, you gave me feedback that I was not clear. That's what I intended in my opening statement. So let me be clear. I have zero tolerance for any form of harassment, retaliation, or reprisal in the United States Forest Service.
And you will create a culture where you also don't tolerate the kind of sexual assault and behaviors that are rampant in your department and have been so for decades.
I am committed to creating a culture where every employee is valued, respected, and feels safe. You have my utmost commitment. In regards to the response from my staff, I'll look into that. It's my understanding you had a response. I think the questions may have been about the actual EEOC complaints about retaliation, but as I said in my opening statement, we know that we have big work to do about the fear of retaliation. People are not coming forward. I cannot be any more clear than that. We know it. We're working on it, and we won't stop until we get it solved.
Thank you. I yield back.
The governor-elect yields back. Congratulations.
Thank you.
We'll now recognize the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Cummings.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And once again, I want to thank you for holding this hearing. It is so very, very important. I want to associate myself with the questions of the next governor of New Mexico. And I want you to understand, Ms. Christensen, that I share her frustration. You know, I sat here and I intentionally waited to the end because I just wanted to hear mainly what you had to say. And as I listened to Ms. Reed, and Ms. Reed, thank you so much. As a trial lawyer, I've watched witnesses I watch witnesses. And there were certain points where Ms. Christensen was speaking where I could see that your emotion, you were about to tear up if you didn't tear up. And I assume that it's because that you deal with some pain that is so deep. And, you know, in the Negro National Anthem, there's a phrase that says, felt in a time when hope unborn had died. And sometimes I think what happens in these situations is that you look out and you have a problem and you're trying to deal with that problem. You're giving it everything you got. I heard you talk about your education, you know, and you're saying, I did this and I did that, and I gave my blood, my sweat, and my tears. I just want to do my job. Just want to do my job. And you're committed to that job. And speaking of that, I know that there are other employees who may be watching this. We want to thank all of them for the jobs that they do. But at some point, Ms. Christensen, we have to break this thing that's going on here. One of the things that the chairman, and I really give him credit for this a lot. He and I have sat in a number of private sessions where people have been harassed. And we may be talking to supervisors, and this question always comes up. Either he asks it or I ask it. Are there women in the process, the decision-making process, the people who are overviewing, viewing everything, who would have an impact on decisions? And there's a reason why we ask that. Because we're not women. And we want to try to understand, and we do understand to a degree. We're husbands, we're fathers, we have female employees, but you understand, so I want to ask you that question. Do we have women in this whole process throughout who have meaningful positions Because I'm sitting here and I'm banging my head and saying to myself, okay, how do you break this culture? And that's my first question, hold that one. But then there's another question that we have to deal with. How do you measure your progress? See, you said you're going to do all these things, and I'm not here beating up on you, I swear. I want to be able to measure your progress, because there's a reason why I ask that. Having been here for 21 years, I've seen problems go and people going in circles about problems. And the problems, it's like they're going nowhere fast. They're moving a lot, but the problems keep getting bigger and worse. You follow me? And so the question is, at some point, we have to say, this is how we measured it. And I just want to know, what do you see as the measuring tools? Because while the chairman is retiring, and in a lot of ways, I hate to see him retire, really, because he gets it. But I can tell you that the members of this committee will continue to hold you to a standard. But I'm saying to you, tell me what the standard is. Tell me, how do we measure when we call you back in 3 months?
Thank you, Congressman.
Because you will come back.
Yes, sir.
All right, go ahead.
You you asked the questions that we are really pondering ourselves very, very hard. It certainly can't be about the number of harassment complaints. Yes, that's the end state, that we have 0 harassment complaints. But that's once we know we've completely stomped out any kind of fear of retaliation. So that we're having more harassment complaints come forward, we're taking that as a small piece of progress. But that is not the end state. So I don't think we're the only organization that is really serious about this. And it's not just an output of something and said, we did it. It has to be a whole system of improvement. And you know what? I don't think it's ever going to be totally done. We always have to improve. You can be good and still not good enough.
I got that, but tell me, how do we measure it?
Well,
Ms. Fong, you might want to come in here too. And I mean, I want to be able to I'm gonna get back to you. I just want to make sure that we are able to say, okay, we moved, we made progress. And you're right, just the numbers, that's not enough. But I'm just trying to figure out how we do that. Well, how do we measure that? I'm going to let Ms. Fong come back.
It's a very difficult area. In the oversight community, which is GAO, the IGs, we're starting to do work across the government on these kinds of issues, and they're new issues for us, for oversight. And I think one of the things that I'm taking away from this hearing is the need for us in the oversight community to get together and to say, what are the best ways that we can offer to our agencies? What are the things they should be looking for? How can we provide standards or guidance or best practices? And I think that might be a useful thing for us to look at.
Go ahead.
That would be extremely helpful. Because this is complicated, and if we're really serious about it, we got to go deep.
I believe that you're serious about it.
And you know when we see that we've rebuilt trust in leaders, we have already opening up and we're empowering employees. This employee advisory group, they are speaking out. They are coming up with great ideas that we are empowering them on how to have peer-to-peer support. So I think with some help of some professionals, we can start to measure the trend line here, right? And that we are not just looking on how many people are we firing? We're looking on the front end about what is a really healthy and sustainable culture. We are doing the climate assessment for the entire agency because we want it as a baseline so that we can
Right.
continue to take this assessment.
But what I want you all to do, what I'd like to see you do, Ms. Fong, is do what you just said. That you all get together, look at best practices, give us some things that we should look at as a measuring tool, and so that we can determine what our progress is. That's not only important for this committee, by the way. That's important for your own organization. I mean, it would be nice for them to know that progress is being made. But there's a gap, Ms. Richardson, between what you're saying and what Ms. Reed so eloquently stated. There's a gap, and we gotta close that gap. And I think that's what Ms. Grisham was just talking about. Now, Inspector Fong, earlier this year, your office issued an interim report entitled Forest Service Initiatives to Address the Workplace Misconduct. The report states that before July 2017, reports of sexual harassment had to be assessed through management inquiries before they could be formally investigated, right? Is that right?
Correct.
Your office found that the problem with the management inquiries was that, quote, the inquiry official was generally a line officer from a neighboring unit who may not have been completely objective in the matter, end of quote. Your report goes on to state that when this arrangement existed, it created the perception that, quote, the process could have been unfair and unbiased, and biased, I'm sorry, end of quote. To be clear, did your office find that there were any instances prior to July 2017 in which the Forest Service employees who conducted management inquiries into allegations of harassment were not completely objective or acted to protect other managers?
Our report did not find any direct evidence of bias or improper conflict of interest. So the recommendation we made was really a best practice recommendation to avoid the perception that there could be bias. We recommended to the Forest Service that they move forward to use external investigators, and they did agree with that recommendation.
Okay. And are we, do we have enough of those folks doing the external?
Yes, Congressman, we do, and we are prioritizing additional resources to put additional investigators, outside investigators on our contract.
Now, Chief Christensen, some of the documents produced by the Forest Service in response to the committee's requests contain pages that are partially or entirely redacted. Did you know that?
I was not directly involved with the document production, Congressman.
Yeah. For example, here's page 841.
Yeah, I'm aware of your concern. I know that our Office of General Counsel and USDA is working with committee staff, and we will work to be absolutely fully responsive.
Well, let me finish. Let me just, and then and thank you for your indulgence, Mr. Chairman. I'm almost finished. It's entirely blacked out. According to the document status report provided in the middle of last night, this page contains a quote, upper management communications. Why are documents containing upper management communications being held from the committee, withheld from the committee?
Again, Congressman, I wasn't directly involved with the document production, but we will absolutely get back to you and work with you with any of your needs and concerns.
All right. And when will you get back to us?
As timely as we can. It's a wealth of documentation, but it's just getting clarity. Working with your committee staff will be as responsive as possible.
As I close, let me leave you with this. You know what really worries me? Ms. Reed. Ms. Reed. It worries me that here's a woman who has come forward, and she's listened to you. And by the way, there's some people behind her that seems to have disagreed with a number of things that you've said. And I don't know why that, I don't know why that is. All I know is that they are reactions to some of the things that you said have been almost like automatic. In other words, it didn't seem like they thought about shaking their head or almost tearing up. This is what I'm trying to get to. You said you've been through your own trials and tribulations. And I'm sure there were many a night, many a day, maybe 4 o'clock in the morning, you sat beside your bed and said, what do I do? Couldn't tell, you really couldn't talk to nobody about it. You wanted to. What do I do? After this hearing is over, she's still got to live with what the stuff that has happened to her. And not just her. It's all the people that are watching this. They're sitting there saying, I don't want them to go away feeling like, there they go again, they had a hearing and nothing happened. And I know that you have said what you had to say, and I believe you. But they got to see something, right? Got to see more. And even if you have to yourself sit in some, and I'm sure, I guess you do, sit in some of these sessions or whatever, help them get through what they've got to go through. Because they are in pain. Am I right, Ms. Reed? This is pain. All right? Are we all on the same page?
We are. I am absolutely committed to the support and the advocacy that every person needs.
Sorry. And how soon will we hear back from you? I forgot. So.
How soon hear
will
from?
We hear back from you? Number one, Ms. Fong, with regard to working with Ms. Fong.
Yes.
To give us some criteria of what we need to be measuring. Ms. Fong?
We will give you a time frame in the next week
as
to how long it will take us.
Yeah, I want to be reasonable.
Yeah.
But we want to hold you to whatever it is. You follow me? Other than that, we're just going in circles. All right? Thank you all very much.
Gentleman yields back. I want to thank all 3 of our witnesses today for appearing. The hearing record will remain open for 2 weeks for any member to submit a written opening statement or questions for the record. Ms. Reed, I say I know, I have no idea how difficult it is to discuss matters like that privately, much less publicly. Ms. Fong, Inspector Generals enjoy bipartisan support in this Congress. You have a really important job. Ms. Christensen, you have an incredible responsibility, but an incredible opportunity, and I think that you, both your professional and personal background gives you a unique chance to change the culture. With that, if there's no further business, without objection, the committee stands adjourned.